Today we're diving into a topic that's been on the hot seat for decades. Beef. It's been painted as the villain of your dinner plate, linked to heart disease, cancer, and even climate change. But what if I told you that a lot of what we've been told is based on myths? Yep, it's time to clear the air. If you've ever felt guilty about enjoying that steak or been told to swap it for a plant-based burger to quote-unquote save the planet, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Primal Shift Podcast. So let's cut through the noise and get to the truth, because it's a lot juicier than you've been led to believe. Myth number one, beef causes heart disease. We all know someone, an Uncle Joe or Aunt Marge, and actually in my case it was Uncle Mario, who had a heart attack. And chances are at some point they were told, cut down on the red meat. But here's the kicker. The idea that beef is a heart killer comes from outdated, flawed science. Mainstream media or mainstream authorities like the American Heart Association still harp on about the dangers of saturated fat in beef. But there is no solid evidence linking unprocessed beef to heart disease. In fact, recent studies, including one from 2020, have shown that beef isn't the enemy at all. One study actually said there is no robust evidence that cutting down on saturated fat reduces heart disease risk. That's the exact opposite of what mainstream authorities like us to believe. Now, let that sink in for a moment, because for years we've been told to avoid something that, when you really dig into the science, doesn't stand up. So the next time someone tells you to trade that ribeye for a bowl of quinoa, remember, it's not the beef that's clogging up your arteries, it's likely more the sugary processed stuff that comes alongside it. Myth number two, beef causes cancer. This one is really hits home, right? Because cancer is a big deal. And the media just loves to push the narrative that red meat is a carcinogen. But let's break this down. Most of the studies linking beef to cancer come from epidemiology. They are correlation studies, like owning a TV increases your risk of heart disease. Well, it's not the TV that causes anything, right? So in other words, they are not causation. And here's the catch. They rarely factor in lifestyle. The people eating more red meat might also be smoking, drinking, and living on processed junk food, like, hot dogs that come with a bun. So is it really the beef that's causing cancer, or is it all the other stuff? A study from 2019, which looked at data from over 5.7 million participants, concluded that the link between beef and cancer is, you guessed it, bogus. It even suggested that the possible risk from eating beef is so small it's almost irrelevant. So here's the bottom line. Beef isn't giving you cancer. In fact, focusing on nutrient-dense, clean sources of beef is one of the best ways to support your health. It's time we stop demonizing one of the most ancient and nutritious foods on the planet. I'd like to thank Peluva for sponsoring this week's episode. Peluva is the brand behind my favorite zero-drop minimalist shoes with the distinctive five-toe design that allows for correct dynamic movement of the foot when walking or running. The latter is impossible when toes are encased in a single box, even a white box. I love my Peluvas because they give me the most authentic barefoot style experience, but with sufficient cushioning to use them all day, even on hard surfaces. Peluvas are also incredibly stylish, and I really like how they look. I've been using my Peluvas during intense CrossFit workouts, while walking the dog, and even during a recent 8-day trip to Disney World, and they've been unbelievably comfortable. They feel like walking barefoot on a putting green. Now you can try a pair of Peluvas with no risk by visiting peluva.com. That's peluva.com. Myth number three, vegetarians live longer. Okay, this is a big one. We've all heard it. Vegetarians live longer. It's become so ingrained in mainstream thought that people believe it without question. But here's the reality. It's not meat that's shortening lifespans. It's the processed garbage people often consume along with it. Many studies that show vegetarians living longer fail to correct for the fact that vegetarians are often more health conscious in general. It's called healthy population bias. They are more likely to avoid alcohol, fast food, and other unhealthy habits. So is it the lack of meat making them live longer, or the lack of chunk? And get this, the people in Hong Kong consume the most meat per capita in the world and have the highest life expectancy. Doesn't that fly in the face of the eat less meat, live longer mantra? The truth is, if you cut processed junk food and focus on whole unprocessed foods, including beef, obviously, you're not going to shorten your lifespan. It's, in fact, quite the opposite. Myth number 4, beef is bad for the environment. Now, this is a hot topic. Everywhere you look, someone's telling you to eat Beyond Burgers to save the planet. But here is where things get interesting. There is this idea floating around that raising cattle is destroying the earth. But if we really look at the numbers, they tell an entirely different story. According to the EPA, as think what you must about the EPA, but according to them, beef production is responsible for just 1.9% of total emissions. Think about it for a second. Only 1.9%. That's not much, especially when you consider how important beef is for human nutrition. Let's also not forget that for centuries, massive herds of methane-producing bison roamed North America, way more than the cattle we raise today. Yet, we weren't worried about climate change then. But here is what people don't talk about. When beef is raised in a regenerative fashion, it can actually help reverse some of the damage caused by industrial agriculture and everything else we are doing that's not good for the planet. Properly managed cattle can restore soil health, sequester carbon, and regenerate land that's been depleted by monocropping. So not only is beef not the villain, but it can actually be part of the solution when done right. Myth number 5, eating beef leads to weight gain and obesity. Now let's talk about one of the biggest misconceptions out there, that eating beef will make you gain weight. And I'm not talking about muscle weight, I'm talking about, fat for the most part. We've all been led to believe that high protein, high fat foods like beef are to blame for expanding waistlines. But here's the truth. It's not the beef. It's, again, the processed junk food and excess carbohydrates that often accompany our meals. Protein, like what we get from beef, is incredibly satiating. Studies show that people who eat more protein tend to eat fewer calories overall because they feel fuller for longer. Plus, beef is loaded with important nutrients that help regulate metabolism and support lean muscle mass. So the idea that beef will make you fat, that's simply not true. And you can test it yourself. Just make every meal focused on a lot of protein and high quality fats like beef, and see what that does to your body composition, to your overall caloric intake, and to how you feel. And you'll figure out for yourself that eating just beef or a lot of protein and fat is not going to make you fat. It might make you actually grow more muscle tissue, and that's a good thing. In fact, cutting out beef in favor of low-quality, high-carb processed foods is far more likely to contribute to weight gain. So if you're looking to stay lean, strong, and energized, beef is a great tool in your dietary arsenal. Myth number 6, beef is hard to digest. I've been hearing that a lot in response to my videos about how I cured IBS and that you should be cutting out all plants and eat only meat for a while. And people say, but it's so hard to digest, it stays in your stomach, etc. That's another myth we hear quite a lot. And some people truly think that when you consume beef, it stays in your stomach for days. This idea has been perpetuated by people who argue that plant-based foods are better for digestion. But here is the thing. That's simply not how human digestion works. Your body is incredibly efficient at breaking down and absorbing the nutrients in beef. In fact, beef is one of the easiest sources of protein for your body to utilize. It's rich in bioavailable nutrients like iron, zinc, and B vitamins, which are essential for overall health. There is a reason why we have such an acidic, comparatively speaking, stomach that helps break down, proteins and digest the fats and the proteins, that we have such a relatively long small intestines to help, again, break down and absorb much of the nutrients we get from animal-based foods, and that we have such a relatively short large intestines that are, our plant-based cousins, in the animal world have a very long, comparatively speaking, large intestines to help break down plant matter. We don't have to. We have the exact opposite. We are uniquely designed to break down proteins and fats from animal-based sources. On the flip side, to the high absorbability of all the stuff that you get from animal-based foods like beef, plant-based proteins often come with anti-nutrients like phytic acid, which can actually block the absorption of key minerals. So while some people might feel bloated or uncomfortable after eating beef, it's often not the beef itself, but rather what they're eating with it. I've mentioned it already, I think 3 times. It's not the beef, it's what you consume with it, like, processed grains, I don't know, potatoes with skins on, heavy sauces, and anything in between. Myth number 7, you can get the same nutrients from plant-based alternatives. And this is probably one of the most persistent myths, and it's been supercharged by the rise of plant-based quote-unquote meats like Beyond Burgers. The idea is that you can get the same nutrients from these alternatives as you do from beef, but that's simply not true. Beef is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. It's packed with high-quality, bioavailable protein, essential fatty acids, and critical nutrients like heme, iron, B12, and creatine, all of which are either absent or much harder to get from plant-based sources. Now, while plant-based sources or products may be fortified with some of these nutrients in synthetic forms, they are not absorbed as efficiently as those in beef. And don't get me started on the additives and chemicals used to make these plant-based products mimic the taste and texture of real meat. If you're so focused on making something look like real meat, why don't just eat real meat? If you're after nutrient density and health, beef is a clear winner. It's not even close. No plant-based patty can compare, or plant-based bacon. Myth number 8, beef is bad for your cholesterol. Many people believe that eating beef will skyrocket their cholesterol levels, leading to heart disease and clogged arteries. This myth is rooted in the outdated belief that dietary cholesterol directly raises blood cholesterol, but recent research has flipped this idea on its head. Studies now show that for most people, the cholesterol in food has very little effect on cholesterol levels in the blood, assuming that high blood cholesterol is bad, which is also not true, but should not be subject of this podcast, since we could be talking for hours here. What's more, the type of fats found in beef, particularly when it's grass-fed, are actually beneficial for heart health. Grass-fed beef, for example, contains higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids and conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA, which are linked to reduced inflammation and better heart health. So while it's important to be mindful of your overall diet, the idea that beef is a cholesterol bomb is simply not supported by the latest science or human evolution, if that's what you believe in. Now, at the end of the day, the myths surrounding beef have stuck around because they've been repeated so often, but just because everyone says it and everyone thinks it doesn't mean it's true. But when you dig into the science, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's clear that beef is far from the villain it's made out to be. It's nutritious, sustainable when raised properly, and let's be honest, absolutely delicious. So don't let this myth hold you back. Ask questions, do the research, and more importantly, don't be afraid to enjoy that steak, because it's likely doing a lot more for your health than anyone's giving it credit for. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Primal Shift Podcast. If you found this eye-opening, share it with a friend, and let's keep busting these myths together. Stay primal, my friends. Until next time.
Next episode, we're blowing up one of the biggest myths in the fitness world: calorie tracking for weight loss. Sounds simple, right? Eat less, move more. But what if we told you it's a colossal waste of time? The numbers are wrong, the math doesn't add up, and your body isn't a calculator. So, what actually works? We're breaking it all down. No fluff, just facts. Tune in